Some parts of history are so bizarre, they sound like fiction. Coffins with telephones, beauty contests for the dead, mousetraps packed with explosives, and yet, all of it really happened. These are the forgotten details they never taught in school. Here are 10 facts from the past you won't believe are real. Number 1. Coffins with telephones. In the 1800s, fear of being buried alive wasn't just urban legend, it was a public obsession. With limited medical understanding, people were often mistakenly declared dead, only to wake up later in the grave. This fear led to the invention of safety coffins. One of the most famous models, patented in 1896 by Thomas Tebb, featured a breathing tube, signaling system, and even a speaking pipe that ran to the surface. Some had bells attached to the hand or foot of the deceased, designed to ring if the person regained consciousness underground. Entire catalogs were printed with safety coffin options, including one model with a feeding tube, should the person remain conscious underground for days. In some European cemeteries, families paid extra for a 3-day delay before burial, just in case. So what do you think? Was this clever early engineering, or just panic taken too far? Would you have bought one for yourself? Number 2. Exploding mousetraps. In 1882, inventor J.H. Tinkham submitted a U.S. patent for a mousetrap that killed pests using small-scale explosives. Instead of a spring-loaded bar, the device triggered a mini blast of gunpowder when activated by a rodent. It was called ingenious, but also dangerous. Reports, though mostly anecdotal, suggested some units damaged floors and started fires in homes. The idea never caught on commercially, but the patent still exists, complete with a labeled diagram. One proposed model included adjustable powder compartments to increase or decrease the force of the explosion, depending on the size of the rodent. Some historians believe these traps were more a novelty for inventors than a product ever intended for mass use. So let's hear it. Would you rather deal with mice or risk an indoor explosion? Would this invention make it past a modern product review? Number 3. Postmortem photography. In the Victorian era, when death rates were high and photography was rare, families often took their only photo with a loved one after they had passed. These portraits weren't seen as grotesque, they were cherished memorials. Professional studios specialized in posing the dead to appear alive, sometimes even standing them upright with metal supports. In some photos, eyes were painted directly onto closed eyelids in the final print. Families might gather around the body as if it were a normal family portrait. Entire photo albums were devoted solely to postmortem images, with elaborate backdrops and floral arrangements. In some regions of Eastern Europe, the tradition continued into the 1930s. So here's the question, do you see this as a morbid tradition or a strangely beautiful act of remembrance? Would you want a last photo like this if it was your only memory? Number 4. Toilets in castles were just open holes. Castles may look majestic on the outside, but inside they lacked even the most basic sanitation. Restrooms were simple stone seats built into walls, with an open hole dropping straight to the moat or ground below. These were called garderobes. There was no privacy, no flushing, and no separation between you and the stench below. During winter, icy wind shot upward through the shaft, and waste sometimes froze in place. In larger castles, dozens of garderobes were arranged in rows, dumping into the same trench or pit, creating a river of sewage that often flooded during storms. Some were built directly into castle towers, allowing waste to spill down the outside wall. Next time you tour a castle, just remember, luxury back then came with its own aroma. Number 5. Heroin syrup marketed as medicine. In 1898, the Bayer Company, yes, the one known for aspirin, introduced heroin as a non-addictive alternative to morphine. It was sold in pharmacies across Europe and the US, often advertised for children's coughs and colds. Ads promised quick relief, and heroin syrup was included in doctors' sample kits. There were even full-page newspaper ads recommending it as a wonder drug. Bayer sold the product globally, reaching over 20 countries before banning it in 1913. Early trials were so poorly documented that patients addicted to morphine were simply being switched to a new equally addictive substance. It remains one of the most alarming examples of how profit and poor science once shaped public health, with devastating consequences. Number 6. Discipline chambers in British schools. Until the 1950s, many elite British schools used isolation rooms, bare, windowless, and freezing, to punish students. These discipline chambers were designed to instill obedience through discomfort and fear. Children were sent there for minor offenses like talking out of turn or arriving late. Some were kept for hours, and in rare cases, overnight. Teachers described it as character building, but survivors tell a different story. Boarding schools recorded these punishments in official ledgers, where multiple entries appear beside the same student's name, often for years. In some institutions, these rooms remained in use until well into the 1970s. What passed for discipline then would likely be considered abuse today, and yet, for decades, it was standard. Number 7. Women erased from military history. Though often overlooked, women fought in wars across Europe well before modern armies allowed it. In 16th and 17th century Poland, for example, there were documented female cavalry units, some even commanding men in battle. In Italy and Spain, noble women helped defend castles, lead troops, and coordinate logistics. A few even received medals only to have their names removed from records later. Letters and battlefield journals occasionally reference women soldiers using male pronouns, likely a method of hiding their true identities from future record keepers. Researchers have discovered armor sets clearly tailored for female bodies in noble family collections. Only in the past few decades have historians begun to uncover their roles, and the scale of what was hidden is still being pieced together. Number 8. Xray shoe fitters. In the mid-20th century, shoe stores across the US and UK used Xray machines to check shoe fit, mostly for kids. Customers stood inside a wooden box and watched their bones line up with the shoe's inner sole. These fluoroscopes were marketed as cutting-edge science. Children saw them as fun toys, and many tried on multiple pairs just to use the machine again. Each use exposed children to up to 20 times more radiation than a chest X-ray. Store clerks who worked beside the machines daily often suffered radiation burns and early cancers. By the mid-1950s, the machines were pulled from stores, but for nearly 2 decades, glowing feet were part of back-to-school shopping. Number 9. Beauty pageant for the dead. In 1905, Chicago held a beauty contest, but all the contestants were deceased. Dubbed the Eternal Beauty Pageant, families submitted post-mortem portraits of young women, and a jury selected a winner dubbed Miss Immortal. It wasn't satire, the event was respectful and solemn, with prizes in music. Local newspapers covered it as a cultural milestone in mourning art. Some families delayed burial for up to a week to allow time for proper photography. Funeral homes even offered discounted embalming for families submitting entries. The winning photograph still exists today, preserved in a private archive. Number 10. High heels were invented for men. In the 17th century, French King Louis XIV popularized high heels not for fashion, but for authority. Standing just 5 feet 4 inches, he wore bright red heels as a royal statement, and only nobles were allowed to copy him. Heels soon became symbols of power across European courts. Men wore them with military uniforms, and some pairs were as much as 4 inches high. Persian cavalry also wore heeled boots for stability while riding, which inspired their adoption in European aristocracy. The red soles, later revived by designer Christian Louboutin, were once reserved exclusively for royalty by royal decree. That famous red bottom? It started with a king.